Billionaire was furious. No nanny could handle his twins until she arrived and did the impossible. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from. And once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Oh, and make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now do sit back and enjoy every detail. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the marble foyer of the Wolf estate, followed immediately by the piercing wails of two toddlers. Cassian Wolf stood frozen in his home office doorway, his tailored charcoal suit wrinkled from another sleepless night, watching his 11th nanny in 6 months gather her purse with trembling hands. "I'm sorry, Mr. Wolf," Margaret Collins stammered, her graying hair disheveled and her professional demeanor completely shattered. "I've been doing this for 20 years, but I can't. They're not bad children, they're just impossible." Cassian finished, his jaw clenching as he surveyed the chaos. August had somehow climbed onto the dining room table and was launching toy cars across the room while Leo sat in a puddle of spilled orange juice screaming at the top of his lungs. Both boys had identical mops of dark brown hair and piercing blue eyes, Haley's eyes, that seemed to hold all the confusion and pain of losing their mother. Margaret nodded quickly, practically sprinting toward the front door. "The agency will send someone else soon, I'm sure." But Cassian wasn't sure. Word was spreading through the elite nanny network in Manhattan. The Wolf twins were becoming infamous, and he was running out of options. As the door slammed shut, 2-year-old August looked up from his position on the table, his lower lip trembling. "Mama," he whispered, the word hitting Cassian like a physical blow. "No, buddy," Cassian said softly, moving toward his sons. "Mama's not coming back, remember?" Leo's crying intensified, and August threw himself backward dramatically, nearly tumbling off the table. Cassian caught him just in time, his designer watch catching on the little boy's shirt. "We talked about this," Cassian said, trying to keep his voice level as he set August down. "We use our inside voices. We don't throw things. We don't climb on furniture." But even as he spoke, he could hear how hollow the words sounded. These weren't business negotiations or product launches he could control with logic and strategic planning. These were two grieving toddlers who missed their mother, and he had no idea how to reach them. His phone buzzed with its 4th urgent message from his assistant about the board meeting he was supposed to be leading in an hour. Cassian glanced at the screen, then at his sons, who were now both sitting in the orange juice puddle, looking up at him with those devastating blue eyes. He canceled the meeting. 20 minutes later, after managing to get both boys cleaned up and settled with snacks in their high chairs, Cassian stood at his kitchen island reviewing resumes on his tablet. His dark hair was pushed back carelessly, revealing the stress lines that had deepened considerably over the past 6 months. At 39, he still carried himself with the confidence of a man who had built an aerospace empire from nothing, but parenthood was humbling him in ways he'd never anticipated. The doorbell rang, and Cassian felt his shoulders tense. Another nanny, another potential disaster. He'd stopped expecting miracles. He opened the door to find a woman in her early 30s with shoulder-length auburn hair, pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore dark jeans, comfortable flats, and a soft gray sweater that looked lived in rather than fresh from a boutique. Her green eyes held a quiet steadiness that was immediately noticeable. No nervous energy, no overly bright smile, no desperate attempt to impress him. "Mr. Wolf, I'm Merritt Keene." Her voice was calm, unhurried. She didn't flinch when a crash came from the kitchen, followed by August's delighted giggling and Leo's protests. "Ms. Keene," Cassian said, stepping aside to let her in. "I should warn you, they've been challenging today." Merritt nodded, setting down a small canvas bag near the entrance. "Where are they?" Instead of launching into his usual speech about schedules and expectations, Cassian simply led her toward the kitchen. August had somehow gotten his hands on a wooden spoon and was banging it against his high chair tray like a drum, while Leo had managed to smear mashed banana across his face and was eyeing the floor as his next target. Merritt didn't say anything at first. She simply stood in the doorway, observing. Then, without any grand gestures or animated baby talk, she walked over to the boy's level and sat cross-legged on the floor. "Hi," she said simply. Both boys stopped what they were doing and stared at her. And for the first time in 6 months, Cassian's house fell completely silent. What would you do if you were in Cassian's position? Trust another stranger with your children's hearts. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Cassian held his breath, watching as his sons, who had terrorized 11 professional caregivers, simply stared at the woman sitting calmly on his kitchen floor. August was the first to move. He dropped his wooden spoon, the clatter echoing in the quiet space, and leaned forward in his high chair with curiosity rather than mischief. Leo, still covered in banana, tilted his head like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "You're sitting on the floor," August observed, his voice small but clear. "I am," Merritt agreed, making no move to get up or change her position. "Is that okay?" Leo pointed at her with a chubby finger. "Dirty." "A little dirty is okay sometimes," she said, completely unbothered by the crumbs and sticky spots surrounding the high chairs. "Are you Leo or August?" "I'm August," the more talkative twin announced proudly. "He's Leo. He doesn't talk much." "That's perfectly fine," Merritt said, looking directly at Leo. "Some people like to listen first." Cassian found himself studying her profile as she interacted with his sons. There was something different about her approach. No forced enthusiasm, no baby talk, no immediate attempts to impose order. She was simply present. "Ms. Keene," he began, but she held up a gentle hand. "Just Merritt, please." She turned to August. "What were you playing with before I got here?" "Cars," August said, pointing to the scattered toys across the dining room. "I was making them fly, but Daddy said no throwing." "Flying cars sound exciting," Merritt said thoughtfully. "But maybe we could find a better place for them to fly. Somewhere safer?" Leo suddenly spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. Mama liked cars. The words hit the room like a physical blow. Cassian's chest tightened, and he saw August's lower lip begin to tremble, the warning sign that usually preceded a complete meltdown. But Merritt didn't panic or try to redirect the conversation. Instead, she nodded seriously. "Tell me about Mama and cars." "She had a red one," August said, his voice growing stronger. "And she made vroom sounds when we played." "She made the best car sounds," Merritt said, "and somehow she managed to sound genuine rather than patronizing. Do you remember any of them?" To Cassian's amazement, August made a soft vrooming sound and Leo giggled. Actually giggled for the first time in weeks. "That's a very good car sound," Merritt said approvingly. "I bet Mama taught you that." As the boys continued to share small memories of their mother, Cassian felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Hope. This woman wasn't trying to replace Haley or pretend she never existed. She was honoring his wife's memory while somehow making it less painful for the boys to talk about her. After 20 minutes of gentle conversation, Merritt stood up and brushed off her jeans. "Would you boys like to help me clean up these cars? We could make a special runway for them." "A runway?" August's eyes lit up. "Like at airports," Merritt explained. "Cars can practice flying there, but they land safely every time." As she began organizing the scattered toys with the boys' enthusiastic help, Cassian found himself genuinely relaxed for the first time in months. He watched Merritt move through his space with quiet efficiency, never rushing, never forcing anything. "How long have you been doing this?" he asked when she approached him near the kitchen island. "Childcare. About 8 years," she said, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "But I've been taking a break recently." Something in her tone made him study her more carefully. There was a sadness in her green eyes that mirrored his own, though she wore it differently, like someone who had learned to carry grief without letting it consume everything around her. "Why the break?" Merritt glanced toward the boys, who were now contentedly arranging toy cars on the makeshift runway she'd created from couch cushions. "Sometimes you need time to remember why you do something before you can do it well again." Her answer was honest without being overly revealing, and Cassian appreciated that. He'd grown tired of people who either pried too deeply into his personal tragedy or avoided mentioning Haley altogether. "They usually don't calm down this quickly," he admitted. "Actually, they never calm down this quickly. Children respond to authenticity," Merritt said simply. "They can sense when someone is genuinely interested in them versus when someone is just trying to manage them." The distinction hit home harder than Cassian wanted to admit. How much of his time with August and Leo had been spent managing rather than connecting? "Daddy, look," August called out, holding up a blue toy car. "It's learning to fly on the runway." For the first time in months, Cassian found himself genuinely smiling at his son's enthusiasm, rather than feeling overwhelmed by it. But as he watched Merritt kneel down to admire August's demonstration, a nagging voice in the back of his mind reminded him that he'd felt hopeful about other nannies too, at least initially. Margaret had lasted 3 weeks. The one before her had made it 5 days. What made him think this would be any different? As if sensing his skepticism, Leo suddenly stood up from where he'd been playing and walked directly to Merritt. Without a word, he climbed into her lap and laid his head against her shoulder. Cassian's breath caught. Leo hadn't voluntarily sought comfort from anyone since Haley died. Merritt didn't make a big deal of the moment. She simply wrapped her arms around the little boy and continued watching August's car demonstration, as if 2-year-olds crawled into her lap every day. But Cassian caught the brief moment when she closed her eyes and held Leo just a little tighter, and he realized that whatever had brought Merritt Keene to his door, she needed this job as much as he needed her to succeed at it. 3 days later, Cassian found himself doing something he hadn't done in months, arriving home early from work with genuine anticipation rather than dread. The house was unusually quiet as he stepped through the front door, but it was a peaceful quiet, not the ominous silence that usually preceded chaos. He set down his briefcase and followed the sound of soft humming toward the living room. What he found there stopped him in his tracks. Merritt was sitting cross-legged on the floor with both boys in her lap, reading from a picture book about airplanes. August was tracing the illustrations with his finger, while Leo leaned against her side, completely relaxed. The late afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows caught the auburn highlights in her hair, and for just a moment, the scene looked like something from the life he'd planned to have with Haley. The thought should have been painful, but instead, it felt like remembering how to breathe. "Daddy!" August spotted him and scrambled to his feet. "Merritt showed us how airplanes work. They have wings like birds, but they're much bigger." "Is that right?" Cassian said, loosening his tie as he moved closer. Leo looked up at him with bright eyes. No tears, no fussing, just genuine contentment. "We also made cookies," Merritt said, closing the book and gently helping Leo stand. "Well, the boys did most of the work. I just supervised the oven situation." "They made cookies?" Cassian couldn't hide his surprise. His son's previous culinary adventures had resulted in flour explosions and at least one minor kitchen fire. "Chocolate chip," August announced proudly. "But we ate some of the chips while we were cooking, so they might not have very many." Cassian found himself laughing, actually laughing, at his son's confession. When was the last time that had happened? "Would you like to see them?" Merritt asked, and something in her tone made him realize she wasn't just talking about the cookies. She was asking if he wanted to be part of this moment, part of whatever she was building with his sons. In the kitchen, he found evidence of their afternoon. A light dusting of flour on the counter, 2 small aprons hanging on child-height hooks that definitely hadn't been there this morning, and a plate of slightly lopsided but clearly homemade cookies cooling on the island. "We cleaned up already," Leo said quietly, pointing to the spotless mixing bowls drying in the rack. "You did all this?" Cassian asked, genuinely impressed. Getting his sons to clean up their toys was usually a 30-minute negotiation. "Cleaning up is part of cooking," Merritt explained matter-of-factly. "Right, boys?" Both August and Leo nodded seriously, as if this was the most obvious thing in the world. Cassian bit into one of the cookies, making an exaggerated face of delight that sent both boys into giggles. "This might be the best cookie I've ever had." "Really?" August beamed. "Really," Cassian confirmed, and he wasn't entirely lying. The cookie was good, but what made it extraordinary was watching his sons' faces light up with pride. As the boys ran off to play, Cassian found himself alone with Merritt for the first time since she'd started. She was wiping down the counter with the same unhurried efficiency she brought to everything, her movements graceful and sure. "How did you do it?" he asked finally. "Do what?" "This." He gestured around the peaceful kitchen. 3 days ago they wouldn't sit still for 5 minutes. Today I come home to cookies and airplane lessons and actual contentment. Merritt paused in her cleaning, considering his question. "I think they were testing everyone else to see if they would stay. Children who've lost someone important. They need to know you're not going anywhere before they'll let you in." The observation hit him like a revelation. Of course. August and Leo had been abandoned by the most important person in their world through no fault of their own. Why wouldn't they test every new person to see if they'd leave too? "And you passed the test?" "I think so," she said softly. "But honestly, Mr. Wolf." "Cassian," he corrected. "Please." "Cassian," she amended, and he liked the way his name sounded in her voice. "I think they were also testing you." "Me?" "Children need to know their parent believes in the person taking care of them. If you don't trust someone, they won't either." She folded the dish towel carefully. "The other nannies. You were waiting for them to fail." He wanted to argue, but he couldn't. She was right. After the 3rd or 4th disaster, he'd stopped believing anyone could handle his sons. He'd been hiring people to fail, and they'd obliged. "So what changed?" Merritt met his eyes directly. "You did." The first day when Leo climbed into my lap and you didn't immediately assume I'd done something wrong or that it wouldn't last. That made all the difference. Before he could respond, August came racing back into the kitchen, his face flushed with excitement. Daddy, can Merritt make dinner with us? She knows how to make spaghetti that looks like worms but tastes good. Cassian looked at Merritt, who was clearly trying not to smile at August's enthusiastic endorsement. Would you like to stay for dinner? He asked, and realized he genuinely hoped she'd say yes. If you're sure it's not too much trouble. It's no trouble at all. But as they began preparing dinner together, Merritt guiding the boys through simple tasks while he handled the more complex cooking, Cassian found himself watching her more than he probably should. The way she anticipated Leo's needs before he expressed them. How she turned August's boundless energy into something productive rather than trying to contain it. The gentle authority in her voice when she set boundaries. She was beautiful, he realized with a start. Not in the polished, obvious way of the women he usually met at business functions, but in a quiet, authentic way that seemed to come from within. The thought made him uncomfortable. He wasn't ready to think about any woman that way. He wasn't sure he'd ever be ready. But as he watched her help Leo wash his hands at the sink, her sleeves rolled up and her hair falling loose from its ponytail, Cassian couldn't deny that something was shifting inside him, something he hadn't felt since Haley died. Daddy, are you okay? August tugged on his pant leg, looking up at him with concern. I'm fine, buddy, he said, forcing himself to focus on the present moment rather than the confusion in his chest. But later that night, after Merritt had gone home and the boys were asleep, Cassian stood in his bedroom looking at the framed photo of Haley on his nightstand and felt something he hadn't expected. Guilt. Not because he was moving on. He wasn't even sure that's what this was. But because for the first time since she died, he'd gone an entire evening without the crushing weight of her absence. And that felt like the biggest betrayal of all. 2 weeks into Merritt's employment, Cassian's morning routine had transformed completely. Instead of dreading the chaos that awaited him downstairs, he found himself lingering over coffee just to watch her interact with his sons. This particular morning, she was teaching them to make pancakes shaped like animals, and the kitchen was filled with the kind of laughter that had been absent from the house for far too long. Look, Daddy. Leo held up a lumpy creation that might have been a bear. I made breakfast. That's incredible, Leo, Cassian said, genuinely impressed by his quieter son's growing confidence. What kind of animal is it? It's an elephant, Leo said seriously, but his trunk fell off. Merritt caught Cassian's eye across the kitchen island and smiled. A real smile that made something warm unfurl in his chest. She was wearing a simple blue sweater that brought out the green in her eyes, and her hair was pulled back in a messy bun with flour dusting her cheek. Merritt showed us how elephants eat peanuts, August chimed in, flipping his own pancake with intense concentration. They use their noses like hands. Trunks, Merritt corrected gently. But you're absolutely right about how they work. As they sat down to breakfast, Cassian found himself studying Merritt more openly. Over the past 2 weeks, she'd seamlessly integrated into their lives without ever overstepping boundaries. She arrived each morning at 7:30 sharp, handled the boys' routines with quiet efficiency, and left promptly at 6, unless he asked her to stay, which was happening more frequently. But despite spending nearly 11 hours a day in his house, he realized he knew very little about her personal life. Do you have family in the city? He asked as August attempted to eat his pancake elephant trunk first. Something flickered across Merritt's face. So briefly he almost missed it. Not anymore. I moved here from Oregon about a year ago. Oregon's beautiful, he said, noting how she'd deflected rather than truly answered his question. What brought you to New York? Change, she said simply, then immediately redirected. August, remember what we talked about with syrup? A little goes a long way. Cassian filed away her evasiveness for later consideration. In his business dealings, he'd learned to recognize when someone was carefully controlling information flow, and Merritt was definitely doing that. After breakfast, as Merritt helped the boys get dressed for their planned trip to Central Park, Cassian's assistant called with an urgent crisis at the office. A key investor was threatening to pull out of their latest satellite project, and the board wanted an emergency meeting. I have to go in, he told Merritt apologetically as she emerged from the boys' playroom with both twins in matching navy jackets. I'm sorry, I know we planned. It's fine, she said immediately. The boys and I can handle the park on our own, right guys? Can we feed the ducks? August asked excitedly. Can we see the big rocks? Leo added, referring to the boulder formations they'd explored the previous week. We can do both, Merritt assured them, then looked at Cassian. How long do you think you'll be? A few hours, maybe more. Are you sure you don't mind? I can try to reschedule. Cassian, she said, and the way she used his first name still made his pulse quicken slightly. Go handle your crisis, we'll be fine. But as he kissed both boys goodbye and watched them head out with Merritt, Cassian couldn't shake a vague uneasiness. Not about her competence. He trusted her completely with his sons now, but about how natural this all felt, how right it looked to see her walking between August and Leo, holding their hands as they chattered excitedly about their adventure. It looked like a family. The thought should have been disturbing, but instead it filled him with a longing so intense it was almost painful. At the office, the investor meeting dragged on for hours. By the time Cassian managed to salvage the deal and smooth over the board's concerns, it was nearly 6 o'clock. He called Merritt's cell phone to let her know he was running late, but it went straight to voicemail. Probably dead battery, he told himself, but anxiety gnawed at him as he raced home through Manhattan traffic. The house was quiet when he arrived, and for a moment, the old panic started to rise. Then he heard voices coming from the back garden, a space Haley had designed, but that had been largely unused since her death. Through the French doors, he could see Merritt sitting on the wooden swing set with both boys in her lap, pointing up at something in the darkening sky. They were all bundled in jackets, their breath visible in the cool evening air. There, she was saying as he stepped outside. Do you see how that star is brighter than the others? That one? August pointed excitedly. That's Venus, Merritt explained. It's not actually a star. It's a planet, like Earth, but much closer to the sun. Does anyone live there? Leo asked, his voice full of wonder. Probably not, Merritt said thoughtfully. But maybe someday people will visit. Maybe one of you will be the first person to walk on Venus. I want to be a spaceman, August declared. Astronaut, Leo corrected seriously. And I want to build the rocket. Those are both excellent goals, Merritt said, giving them each a squeeze. Cassian stood in the doorway, transfixed by the scene. Haley had always talked about teaching the boys about astronomy when they were older. She'd wanted to show them constellations and tell them stories about ancient myths. Instead of feeling the sharp pang of loss he expected, Cassian felt something more complex. Gratitude that someone was fulfilling those dreams, even if it wasn't the person who'd originally planned them. Daddy! August spotted him and wiggled out of Merritt's lap. We saw Venus and we fed 17 ducks, and Leo didn't cry when the big dog came over. 17 ducks? Cassian raised an eyebrow as he approached the swing. We counted, Leo said proudly, though Cassian suspected the actual number had been much lower. It sounds like you had quite an adventure, he said, settling onto the other swing as August climbed back onto Merritt's lap. The best part was the stars, Merritt said softly, her eyes still fixed on the darkening sky. I haven't done this in a long time. What, stargazing? She nodded, and in the dim light from the house, he caught something wistful in her expression. I used to do it every night when I was little. My dad he worked nights a lot, so it was just me and my mom. She'd make hot chocolate and we'd sit outside and she'd tell me stories about the constellations. It was the most personal information she'd shared since starting work, and Cassian found himself hungry for more. Your parents still in Oregon? The change in her expression was immediate and stark. The warmth disappeared, replaced by something that looked almost like pain. My mother died when I was 16, she said quietly. Car accident, my father, he wasn't really built for single parenthood. The parallel to his own situation wasn't lost on either of them, and Cassian felt a sharp stab of connection that went beyond employer and employee. I'm sorry, he said, meaning it completely. It was a long time ago, Merritt said, but her voice carried the weight of someone who'd never quite stopped grieving. That doesn't make it easier, Cassian said softly, thinking of his own supposedly healing timeline. Their eyes met across the space between the swings, and for a moment, the air felt charged with unspoken understanding. Two people who'd lost everything and were somehow finding their way back to something resembling life. Can we see more stars? Leo asked sleepily, breaking the spell. I think it's getting too cold for little boys to be outside, Merritt said, though she made no move to get up. Just 5 more minutes? August pleaded. As Cassian looked at his sons, relaxed, happy, secure, and at the woman who'd somehow made that possible, he realized with startling clarity that he was in trouble, because somewhere between the failed pancake elephants and the 17 ducks and this moment under the stars, he'd stopped thinking of Merritt Keene as just his children's nanny, and he had absolutely no idea what to do about that. The crisis came on a Thursday morning in November. 3 weeks after the stargazing incident that had left Cassian questioning everything he thought he knew about moving forward. He was reviewing quarterly reports in his home office when he heard Leo's piercing scream from upstairs. Not his usual fussy cry, but something that made Cassian's blood run cold. He took the stairs 3 at a time, his heart pounding. He found Merritt in the boys' bathroom, calmly holding Leo while blood streamed from a gash above his left eyebrow. August stood nearby, his face pale and tear-streaked. "What happened?" Cassian demanded, immediately reaching for his son. "He slipped getting out of the bathtub," Merritt said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Hit the corner of the vanity. It looks worse than it is, but he's going to need stitches." Leo was sobbing against her shoulder, and Cassian felt the familiar surge of panic that came with any reminder of how fragile his children were, how quickly everything could change. "I'll drive," he said, grabbing a towel to press against Leo's head. "Actually," Merritt said carefully, "I think it might be better if I take him. He's calmer with me right now, and you're—" "I'm what?" Cassian's voice came out sharper than he intended. Merritt met his eyes steadily. "You're scared, and that's making him more scared." She was right, and they both knew it. Leo had stopped struggling against her hold and was clinging to her like a lifeline, while every time Cassian reached for him, the little boy's sobs intensified. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His own son preferred comfort from someone else during a crisis. "Fine," he said stiffly. "I'll stay with August." But as he watched Merritt carry Leo toward the door, speaking to him in low, soothing tones, Cassian felt something darker than panic settling in his chest. It was inadequacy, mixed with a possessiveness he had no right to feel. These were his children, his responsibility, his family. So why did it feel like Merritt belonged in that equation more than he did? 2 hours later, she returned with Leo sporting 3 neat stitches and a superhero bandage, chattering excitedly about the special thread the doctor had used to fix his head. The crisis was over, but something fundamental had shifted in Cassian's perspective. That evening, after the boys were asleep, he found Merritt in the kitchen finishing the dinner dishes. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for today. You handled everything perfectly." "It wasn't anything special," she said, drying her hands on a towel. "Just basic first aid and staying calm. It was more than that, and you know it." He moved closer, studying her profile in the soft kitchen lighting. "Leo trusted you completely. August too, He hesitated, then forced himself to say it. "They love you." Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or something deeper. "I love them too," she admitted softly. The honesty in her voice made his chest tighten. "Sometimes I think they love you more than they love me." "That's not true," Merritt said immediately, turning to face him fully. "Cassian, they worship you. You're their whole world." "Am I?" "Because today, when Leo was hurt, he wanted you, not me." Merritt was quiet for a long moment, clearly choosing her words carefully. Children often seek comfort from whoever makes them feel safest in that specific moment. "It doesn't mean you make them feel safer than their own father does. That's not what I said. It's what you meant." The tension that had been building all day finally erupted, and Cassian found himself saying things he'd been thinking but never planned to voice. "Do you know what it's like?" he continued, his voice rising slightly. "To watch someone else be better at parenting your own children than you are? To come home every day and see that my sons are happier, calmer, more themselves with you than they've ever been with me? Cassian, I've been trying for 8 months to connect with them the way Haley did. 8 months of feeling like I'm failing at the one thing that should come naturally, and then you walk in and within 3 weeks, you've given them something I can't." Merritt's green eyes flashed with something he couldn't quite read. "And what exactly do you think I've given them?" "Peace," he said simply. "Joy. The ability to be children instead of walking reminders of everything I've lost." The words hung between them, raw and honest and more revealing than he'd intended. Merritt stared at him for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Is that really what you think? That they're just reminders of loss?" "Sometimes," he admitted, hating himself for the confession. "Sometimes I look at them, and all I can see is Haley. Her eyes, her smile, her voice when August laughs, and it hurts so much I can barely breathe. So you pulled away from them. I tried to protect them from my grief, but instead, I think I just made them feel like they weren't enough to make me happy." Merritt was quiet for so long that Cassian began to wonder if he'd said too much, revealed too much of his own inadequacy. Finally, she spoke. "Do you want to know what I see when I look at your sons?" He nodded, not trusting his voice. I see two little boys who miss their mama so much it breaks my heart, but I also see August's determination and Leo's quiet strength, and I see the way they light up when you walk in the room, even when you're too lost in your own pain to notice. She moved closer, close enough that he could smell her shampoo, something light and floral that reminded him of spring. I see children who need their father to believe that loving them won't betray their mother's memory. They need you to show them that it's possible to hold grief and joy at the same time. Her words hit him like a revelation, stripping away months of guilt and confusion to reveal a truth he'd been too afraid to acknowledge. I don't know how to do that, he said quietly. Yes, you do, Merritt said firmly. You just did it tonight when you let me take Leo to the hospital instead of insisting on being the hero. You chose what was best for him over what your ego wanted. They were standing close now, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes, close enough to notice the way her breath caught slightly when he looked at her. Merritt, he said, and her name came out rougher than he intended. Yes? I think I'm falling in love with you. The confession escaped before he could stop it, raw and unplanned and absolutely terrifying. Merritt's eyes widened, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Then she stepped back, putting distance between them, and Cassian felt his heart sink. You can't, she said quietly. I can't help how I feel. No, you don't understand. Her voice was strained now, almost panicked. You can't fall in love with me because I'm not who you think I am. Before he could ask what she meant, she was grabbing her purse and jacket from the counter, moving toward the door with the same efficiency she brought to everything else. Merritt, wait. I'll see you in the morning, she said without turning around. And then she was gone, leaving Cassian alone in his kitchen with the echo of her words and the devastating realization that whatever he thought he knew about Merritt Keene, he was wrong. Cassian didn't sleep that night. He replayed Merritt's words over and over, analyzing every conversation they'd had, every carefully deflected question, every moment when she'd seemed to retreat into herself. I'm not who you think I am. By 6 in the morning, he was sitting at his kitchen island with his laptop open, doing something he probably should have done weeks ago, running a proper background check on the woman he'd entrusted with his children's lives. What he found made his blood run cold. The employment history she'd provided checked out, but it was sparse. The references were legitimate but strangely brief, and there were gaps, months where there was no record of her anywhere, as if she'd simply vanished from existence. But it was the archived newspaper article from Portland, Oregon, dated 14 months ago, that stopped his heart completely. Local woman loses custody battle, disappears after court ruling. The photograph was grainy, but there was no mistaking those green eyes, that auburn hair. Merritt Keene, though according to the article, her name had been Merritt Bishop then, standing outside a courthouse, her face etched with devastating loss. Cassian read the article twice, his hands shaking. Merritt Bishop, 29, lost her final appeal for custody of her deceased sister's daughter after a lengthy legal battle with the child's paternal grandparents. Bishop had been caring for 4-year-old Emma since her sister Claire's death from cancer 2 years prior, but the court ruled in favor of the biological grandparents, citing Bishop's unstable employment history and inability to provide adequate financial security. The decision was controversial, with several child welfare advocates arguing that removing Emma from the only stable home she'd known since her mother's death was not in the child's best interest. However, the Hartwell family's legal team successfully argued that their established wealth and resources would provide better opportunities for the child's future. Bishop could not be reached for comment and has reportedly left the Portland area. Emma Hartwell, now 5, is living with her paternal grandparents in Vancouver, Washington. The article was dated 13 months ago. Merritt had told him she'd moved to New York about a year ago. She hadn't just lost a job. She'd lost a child she'd been raising as her own. Cassian stared at the photograph until his eyes burned, seeing Merritt's devastation with new understanding. Every gentle moment with August and Leo, every careful boundary she'd maintained, every time she'd pulled back when things got too personal, it all made heartbreaking sense now. She wasn't just his children's nanny. She was a woman who'd had her own child ripped away from her by people with more money and power. People exactly like him. At 7:30, Merritt arrived as she always did, letting herself in with the key he'd given her 2 weeks prior. But everything was different now. She moved with the same quiet efficiency, but Cassian could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she avoided his eyes. "Good morning," she said carefully, hanging her jacket in the hall closet. "We need to talk," Cassian said. Something in his tone made her freeze. "The boys are still asleep. This is about you." About Emma. The name hit her like a physical blow. All the color drained from her face, and for a moment Cassian thought she might actually collapse. "How did you—" She started, then stopped, her expression shifting to something resigned. "You ran a background check. I should have done it sooner." Merritt nodded slowly, then moved to the kitchen island, gripping the edge like she needed support. "I suppose you want me to leave. I want you to explain." She was quiet for so long that Cassian began to wonder if she'd heard him. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "Emma was my sister Claire's daughter. When Claire got sick, stage 4 pancreatic cancer, she asked me to take care of Emma if anything happened. There was no formal arrangement, no legal paperwork. Emma's father had died in Afghanistan when she was 6 months old, and his parents had never shown any interest in her before Claire got sick." Merritt's hands were trembling now, and Cassian found himself fighting the urge to reach for her. "For 2 years it was just Emma and me. I was working as a teacher then, and we had this little apartment with a garden. Emma loved to plant flowers." Her voice cracked slightly. "She called me Mama Merritt, not because I was trying to replace Claire, but because that's just what felt natural to her." "What changed?" Cassian asked quietly. "The Hartwells found out about the life insurance money Claire had left for Emma's education. Suddenly they wanted to be involved. They had lawyers, money, connections. I had a teaching salary and a rented apartment." The bitterness in her voice was unmistakable, and Cassian felt a stab of guilt on behalf of anyone who'd ever used wealth as a weapon. "The court battle lasted 8 months. They painted me as unstable, irresponsible, financially inadequate. They said a single woman with no biological connection to Emma couldn't provide the same opportunities as a married couple with a house in the suburbs and a trust fund. But you'd been raising her for 2 years. It didn't matter. Blood and money trumped love and stability." Merritt's laugh was hollow. "The day they took her, Emma screamed for me. She didn't understand why strangers were taking her away from the only home she remembered." Cassian felt sick imagining it. This woman who loved children so completely, who had such a natural gift for nurturing, having her own child torn away from her. "Where is she now?" "Vancouver, Washington, with the Hartwells. She paused, visibly steadying herself. "I'm allowed supervised visits twice a year, 2 hours each time with a social worker present." The injustice of it was staggering. Cassian had witnessed corporate betrayals, hostile takeovers, ruthless business practices, but nothing had prepared him for the casual cruelty of what Merritt had endured. "That's why you took a break from childcare," he said, understanding flooding through him. "I couldn't be around children for months. It hurt too much. But eventually I realized that working with kids was the only thing that made me feel like myself again. Like the part of me that knew how to love hadn't died completely. And you came to New York. I needed to disappear for a while. Start over somewhere no one knew my story." She finally looked at him directly. "I should have told you. I know that. But I was afraid you'd think I was unstable, or that I'd get too attached to August and Leo." "Are you? Too attached?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither of them had been ready to face until now. "Yes," Merritt whispered. "God help me, yes. I love them like they're my own, and I know that's not my place. I know they're not mine to love. Merritt, and last night when you said you were falling in love with me, all I could think was that you're exactly like them. Rich, powerful, used to getting what you want. And if this goes wrong, if you decide I'm not good enough or I disappoint you somehow, you have the power to take them away from me too." Her words hit him like a gut punch. She wasn't just afraid of losing another job. She was terrified of losing another family. "I would never," he started, but she cut him off. "You don't know that. People change their minds. Circumstances change, and I can't survive losing children I love again. I won't." Before he could respond, the sound of small feet on the stairs announced that August and Leo were awake. Merritt immediately straightened, wiping her eyes and transforming back into the composed caregiver his sons knew. "We'll finish this later," Cassian said quietly. But as he watched her greet August and Leo with the same warmth as always, despite the emotional devastation she'd just revealed, Cassian realized that everything had changed. He wasn't just falling in love with his children's nanny anymore. He was falling in love with a woman who'd been broken by people exactly like him, and he had no idea how to prove that he was different without risking everything. For 3 days after the revelation about Emma, Cassian and Merritt moved around each other like strangers sharing a house. She maintained her professional distance with renewed determination, while he struggled with the weight of everything he now understood about her past. The boys sensed the tension immediately. August became clingy and defiant, while Leo retreated into unusual silence. By Wednesday evening, Cassian knew something had to give. He was working late in his home office when his phone rang. The caller ID showed his lawyer's name, and Cassian answered with distraction. "Richard, what's so urgent that it can't wait until morning?" "Cassian, we have a problem." Richard Sterling's voice was tense. "I just got off the phone with social services. Someone filed a complaint about your childcare situation." The words hit Cassian like ice water. "What kind of complaint?" "Anonymous tip claiming that you've hired an unfit caregiver with a history of losing custody of children. They're sending someone to conduct a home visit tomorrow morning." Cassian's blood turned cold. How would anyone know about... He stopped, the implications crashing over him. Someone's been digging into Merritt's background. That's what it looks like. The complaint specifically mentions the Oregon custody case and questions whether she's psychologically stable enough to care for young children. Cassian closed his eyes, his mind racing. Who would do this? Could be anyone. A disgruntled former employee, a business rival, someone with a personal grudge. The point is, they know enough details to make this look credible to social services. What does this mean for the boys? Best case scenario? They interview Merritt, do a home inspection, and clear everything up within a few days. Worst case, Richard paused. They could remove August and Leo from the home pending a full investigation. The thought of his sons being taken away made Cassian's chest constrict with panic. That's not happening. Then you need to make some decisions, and fast. The social worker will be there at 9 a.m. sharp. After hanging up, Cassian sat in his office staring at the darkened window, trying to process the nightmare that was unfolding. Someone had weaponized Merritt's past against her, and by extension, against his family. He found her in the kitchen preparing the boys' lunches for the following day with her usual methodical care. She looked up when he entered, and something in his expression made her freeze. "What's wrong?" "Social services is coming tomorrow morning. Someone filed a complaint about you." The lunch containers slipped from her hands, clattering onto the counter. "What?" Cassian explained the phone call, watching as the color drained from her face with each detail. "They know about Emma," she whispered when he finished. "Yes." Merritt sank onto one of the bar stools, her hands shaking. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. My past following me, destroying everything I touch. This isn't your fault, isn't it?" Her voice was sharp with self-recrimination. "I should have told you about Emma from the beginning. I should have been honest about the custody battle, about why I really left Oregon. Instead, I let you hire me under false pretenses. You weren't under false pretenses. You're incredible with August and Leo. That won't matter to social services. All they'll see is a woman who lost custody of a child and is now caring for two more. They'll think I'm unstable, dangerous, a risk." Cassian moved closer, wanting to comfort her but unsure if his touch would be welcome. "We'll fight this. I have lawyers, resources." "No." Merritt stood abruptly, backing away from him. "You don't understand. Fighting will only make it worse. If social services thinks you're protecting an unfit caregiver, they could take August and Leo away from you too." The possibility had already occurred to him, but hearing it voiced made his stomach clench. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying I have to go." Her voice was steady now, resigned. "Tonight, before the social worker arrives." "Absolutely not. Cassian, think about this logically. If I'm not here tomorrow, the complaint becomes meaningless. You can tell them you terminated my employment as soon as you learned about my background. Find a new nanny, someone with a perfect record, and this whole thing disappears. I don't want a new nanny. I want you." The words hung between them, carrying more weight than either of them was prepared to acknowledge. "What you want doesn't matter," Merritt said quietly. "What matters is protecting August and Leo, and the best way to do that is to remove the threat, which is me. You are not a threat to my children. I am if my presence here gets them taken away from their father." Cassian stared at her, seeing the determination in her green eyes and recognizing the same fierce protectiveness that had driven her to fight for Emma. She would sacrifice herself to keep his boys safe, just as she would have done anything to keep her niece. "There has to be another way," he said desperately. "There isn't. And deep down, you know that." Merritt moved toward the hallway, then paused. "I need to pack my things and say goodbye to them." "Merritt, wait. Please don't make this harder than it already is." She disappeared upstairs, leaving Cassian alone in the kitchen with the devastating realization that he was about to lose the best thing that had happened to his family since Haley died. 20 minutes later, she returned with a single suitcase and the controlled composure of someone who'd had practice at leaving everything behind. "You're really going to do this?" he said, still unable to believe it was happening. "I have to. What about August and Leo? They'll be devastated. They'll understand eventually. Children are resilient, more resilient than adults usually." Her voice wavered slightly. Will you tell them that I loved them? That leaving wasn't their fault? Tell them yourself." "I can't. If I see them, if I have to watch them cry." She shook her head. "I won't survive it." Cassian felt desperation clawing at his chest. "So that's it? You just disappear? Again? It's what I'm good at." "No. What you're good at is loving people and then running when things get complicated. What you're good at is protecting everyone except yourself." His words hit their mark. Merritt's composure cracked, and for a moment he saw the raw pain she'd been hiding. "You think I want this?" she whispered. "You think I want to lose another family? But I learned something from the custody battle, Cassian. Sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away. That's not love, that's cowardice." The accusation hung between them like a slap. Merritt straightened, her mask sliding back into place. "Maybe you're right," she said quietly, "but my cowardice never put children at risk. Can you say the same about your pride?" Before he could respond, she was moving toward the door, her suitcase rolling behind her with a finality that made his chest ache. "Merritt," he called out, his voice breaking slightly. She stopped but didn't turn around. "I love you," he said simply. "Not just what you do for my children, but you. The woman who plants flowers and teaches astronomy and makes elephant pancakes. The woman who loved Emma enough to fight an impossible battle, and who loves August and Leo enough to break both our hearts to keep them safe." He saw her shoulders shake, but when she spoke, her voice was steady. "I love you too. That's why I'm leaving." And then she was gone, leaving Cassian alone in his house that suddenly felt too big, too quiet, and completely empty despite the fact that his sons were sleeping peacefully upstairs. He stood in the hallway for a long time, staring at the door she'd walked through, trying to figure out how to explain to two little boys that the person they'd come to depend on had vanished from their lives without saying goodbye, just like their mother had. She was afraid to lose. The social worker arrived at exactly 9 a.m., a stern-faced woman in her 50s with a clipboard and the demeanor of someone who'd seen too much. Cassian met her at the door, having spent the sleepless night preparing for this moment. "Mr. Wolf, I'm Janet Morrison from Child Protective Services. We're here regarding a complaint about your childcare arrangements." "Of course. Please come in." Cassian led her to the living room where August and Leo were quietly playing with blocks, a scene he'd carefully orchestrated after explaining to them that a nice lady would be visiting to make sure they were happy and safe. "Where are the boys' current caregivers?" Ms. Morrison asked, settling into a chair and pulling out her forms. "I terminated Ms. Keene's employment last night after learning about her background," Cassian said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "The boys are currently in my care while I search for a replacement." It wasn't technically a lie, but it felt like a betrayal of everything Merritt had meant to their family. "I see. And how long was Ms. Keene in your employ?" "About 6 weeks." Ms. Morrison made notes, then looked up at the boys. "May I speak with them?" For the next 30 minutes, Cassian watched as the social worker gently questioned August and Leo about their daily routines, their feelings about their caregivers, whether anyone had ever made them feel unsafe. The boys answered with the innocent honesty of toddlers, describing their love for Merritt and confusion about why she wasn't there that morning. "Where did Merritt go?" August asked for the third time, his lower lip trembling. "Is she coming back for lunch?" "We'll talk about it later, buddy," Cassian said, his heart breaking at the lost look in his son's eyes. After inspecting the house, reviewing Cassian's background and asking detailed questions about his childcare arrangements, Ms. Morrison finally closed her clipboard. "Mr. Wolf, I have to say your home environment appears stable and loving. The boys seem well cared for and appropriately bonded with you. However, I'm concerned about the abrupt departure of their primary caregiver. It was a difficult decision, but I felt it was necessary given the information that came to light. I understand, but in the future, I'd recommend more thorough background checks before hiring someone to care for your children." The complaint mentioned that Ms. Keene had a history of inappropriate attachment to children in her care. Cassian's jaw clenched. The characterization of Merritt's love for Emma as inappropriate attachment made him want to defend her, but he forced himself to remain silent. "Will there be any follow-up?" he asked instead. "We'll close the case, but I'll need documentation that you've hired a properly vetted replacement within 2 weeks. If there are any further concerns, there won't be." After Ms. Morrison left, Cassian sat on his living room floor with his sons, trying to find words to explain the unexplainable. "Daddy, where's Merritt?" Leo asked quietly, his small hand resting on Cassian's knee. "She had to go away, buddy. Like Mama went away?" August's voice was small and frightened. The parallel Cassian had dreaded was already forming in their young minds. "Not like Mama. Merritt is still alive. She can't be our nanny anymore." "But why?" August's eyes filled with tears. "Did we do something bad?" No, no, no. Cassian pulled both boys onto his lap. "You did nothing wrong. Sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices to keep the people they love safe." "I want her to come back," Leo whispered. "I know. I want that too." But even as he comforted his sons, Cassian's mind was racing. The complaint hadn't been random. Someone had targeted Merritt specifically, using intimate knowledge of her past to destroy her life once again, and he was going to find out who. That afternoon, while the boys napped, Cassian called Richard Sterling. "I want to know who filed that complaint," he said without preamble. "Cassian, it was anonymous. Nothing is truly anonymous if you dig deep enough. Someone wanted to hurt Merritt, and they used my children to do it. I want names. Even if we find out who it was, what are you planning to do? The damage is done. Ms. Keene is gone. The case is closed. The case might be closed, but this isn't over." Cassian's voice was steel. "Someone weaponized the system against a woman who lost everything trying to protect a child. They turned her greatest tragedy into a weapon against her. That's not justice. It's cruelty. And what exactly do you plan to do about it?" "Whatever it takes to make this right." 3 days later, Richard called back with answers that made Cassian's blood boil. "The complaint came from Patricia Hartwell," Richard said. "Emma's paternal grandmother. Apparently she's been monitoring Merritt's social media and employment records. When she saw that Merritt was working for you, a high-profile family, she panicked about potential negative publicity. She destroyed Merritt's life to protect her own reputation. It gets worse. I did some digging into the original custody case. The Hartwells have been systematically isolating Emma from any reminders of her previous life. They moved her to a private school, changed her last name, and according to my sources, they've been telling people that Merritt was an unstable stranger who tried to take advantage of a grieving family." Cassian felt sick. "What about Emma? How is she?" "That's where it gets complicated. I spoke to someone who works at Emma's school. Off the record, they said she's been struggling. Behavioral issues, academic problems, signs of depression. She's asked about Mama Merritt repeatedly, but the Hartwells have forbidden any discussion of her previous life." The picture Richard painted was devastating. A little girl torn from the only stable home she'd known, isolated from her past, and struggling to understand why the person who loved her most had simply disappeared, just like August and Leo were struggling now. That evening, as Cassian watched his sons pick at their dinner with none of their usual enthusiasm, he made a decision that would have seemed impossible just a week earlier. "Boys, how would you feel about taking a trip?" "Where?" August asked listlessly. "To see Merritt." Both boys looked up with sudden hope, and Cassian saw a spark of life return to their eyes for the first time since she'd left. "Is she coming home?" Leo asked. "I don't know, buddy, but I think it's time we reminded her that families don't give up on each other." Later that night, after the boys were asleep, Cassian stood in his bedroom looking at Haley's photograph. For months, he'd felt like loving anyone else would be a betrayal of her memory. But now he understood something he should have realized long ago. Haley had loved fiercely and completely. She'd fought for what mattered, protected the vulnerable, and never let fear stop her from doing what was right. Letting Merritt disappear without a fight wasn't honoring Haley's memory. It was betraying everything she taught him about love. He picked up his phone and started making travel arrangements. It was time to stop letting other people's cruelty win. It was time to bring his family home. Cassian found Merritt exactly where he'd expected to, sitting alone on a bench in Central Park at dawn, feeding pigeons with the same gentle patience she'd shown his sons. She looked smaller somehow, wrapped in an oversized coat, her auburn hair dull in the gray morning light. She didn't seem surprised to see him approaching with August and Leo in tow, though her breath caught when the boys spotted her. "Merritt!" August broke free from Cassian's hand and ran toward her. Leo close behind. For a moment she looked like she might run. Then both boys crashed into her arms, and her careful composure crumbled completely. "I missed you," Leo whispered against her shoulder, his small arms tight around her neck. "I missed you too, baby," she whispered back, tears streaming down her face. "I missed you both so much." Cassian approached slowly, giving her time to compose herself while she held his sons like lifelines. "How did you find me?" she asked without looking up. "You told me once that you used to stargaze with your mother. I figured if you needed to think, you'd go somewhere you could see the sky." It had actually taken him 3 attempts, Washington Square Park, then Bryant Park, before finally finding her here, but she didn't need to know that. "The social worker came," he said quietly. "I know. I saw the news report online." She finally looked at him, her green eyes red-rimmed but fierce. "Are the boys okay? Did they cleared us. Case closed." He settled onto the bench beside her, close enough that their knees almost touched. "I also know who filed the complaint." Merritt's expression hardened. "Let me guess. Patricia Hartwell. You knew?" "I suspected. She's made it her mission to erase me from Emma's life completely. When she couldn't legally stop me from existing, she found another way to destroy me. She won't succeed, won't she?" Merritt's laugh was bitter. "Look around, Cassian. I'm sitting in a park at 6 in the morning feeding pigeons because I have nowhere else to go. My career is over. My reputation is ruined, and I just hurt 2 children I love by disappearing from their lives. I'd say she's already succeeded. Only if you let her." Merritt shook her head, gently disentangling herself from the boys and creating distance between them. "You don't understand. This won't stop with one complaint. She'll keep coming after me, keep finding ways to make sure I can't work with children, can't build any kind of life that might threaten her control over Emma. Then we fight back. With what? You saw how easily she manipulated the system before. She has money, lawyers, connections. So do I." Cassian's voice was quiet but determined. "The difference is, I'm willing to use them for something other than self-preservation." Before Merritt could respond, August tugged on her coat sleeve. "Are you coming home now?" he asked hopefully. Merritt's face crumpled. "Oh, sweetheart, I can't." "Why not?" Leo's voice was small but insistent. "We need you. Your daddy will find someone else to take care of you, someone better." "Nobody's better than you," August said with the absolute certainty of a 2-year-old. "Right, Daddy?" Cassian met Merritt's eyes over his sons' heads. "Right. Nobody's better than Merritt. This isn't fair," she whispered. "You can't use them to manipulate me into coming back." "I'm not manipulating anyone. I'm telling you the truth." Cassian moved closer, his voice dropping so only she could hear. "The boys haven't eaten a full meal since you left. Leo wakes up crying for you every night. August asks me at least 10 times a day when you're coming home. They'll adjust. Will they? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like they're going through another loss, another abandonment by someone they trusted completely." His words were harsh but necessary. "Is that really what you want for them?" Merritt flinched as if he'd struck her. "That's not fair. None of this is fair. It wasn't fair when you lost Emma. It wasn't fair when Patricia Hartwell filed that complaint, and it's not fair that you're punishing yourself and my children for crimes you didn't commit. I'm protecting them." "No, you're protecting yourself. You're so afraid of being hurt again that you're willing to hurt everyone else first." The accusation hung between them, brutal and honest. Merritt stared at him with something that might have been hatred or heartbreak. He couldn't tell which. "You want to know what I'm really afraid of?" she said finally, her voice shaking. "I'm afraid that if I come back, if I let myself believe this could work, Patricia Hartwell will find another way to destroy it. And next time, she might succeed in taking August and Leo away from you too. So we don't give her the chance." "How?" Cassian took a deep breath, about to voice the plan that had been forming in his mind since Richard's phone call. "We go to Washington. We see Emma. We document what the Hartwells have done to her, and we fight for custody." Merritt's face went white. "That's impossible. The case was closed. The decision was final. New evidence changes things. If we can prove that removing Emma from your care was detrimental to her well-being, if we can show that the Hartwells have been systematically damaging her psychological health, they'll never let me see her. The visitation rights don't apply if you're there as part of a formal welfare check." Cassian pulled out his phone, showing her a contact screen. "I've already spoken to a family law specialist in Washington. She thinks we have grounds for an appeal if we can demonstrate that Emma's best interests weren't served by the original ruling." Merritt stared at the phone like it might bite her. "This is insane. Even if it worked, Even if we somehow got Emma back, what then? We'd be a family built on a legal battle. The press would be all over it. Your business. My business will survive. The question is, will you? She was quiet for a long moment, watching August and Leo chase pigeons with the kind of carefree joy they hadn't shown in days. What if we lose? She whispered. What if we win? And us? What happens between us if we do this? Cassian reached for her hand, relieved when she didn't pull away. I love you, Merritt. Not just as my children's caregiver, but as the woman I want to build a life with. If we get Emma back, if we can create the family we're all meant to have, then we figure out the rest together. And if we don't get her back, then we still figure it out together. Because I'm not losing you again, and I'm not letting Patricia Hartwell win. Merritt looked down at their joined hands, then at August and Leo, who had stopped chasing pigeons and were watching the adults with the intuitive understanding that something important was happening. If we do this, she said finally, there's no going back. Once we challenge the Hartwells, they'll come after us with everything they have. Let them come. You don't know what you're signing up for. I'm signing up for you, for us, for the family we deserve to be. Merritt closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, Cassian saw something he hadn't seen since the night she'd left. Hope. Okay, she whispered. Let's go get Emma. As they stood to leave the park, August and Leo each grabbing one of Merritt's hands while chattering excitedly about going home, Cassian felt something shift in his chest. For the first time since Haley's death, he wasn't just surviving or protecting what he had left. He was fighting for something new, something better, something worth the risk of losing everything. He was fighting for love. The Hartwell house in Vancouver was everything Merritt had described. Imposing, perfectly manicured, and utterly without warmth. Standing on the front steps with Cassian, the boys and their family attorney, Merritt felt like she was preparing for war. Remember, Attorney Sarah Chen said quietly, we're here for a welfare check based on new evidence of emotional distress. Keep it professional, document everything, and let me handle the legal aspects. Patricia Hartwell opened the door with the practiced smile of someone accustomed to controlling every situation. She was in her early 60s, impeccably dressed, with silver hair pulled into a severe bun, and eyes that went ice cold the moment she saw Merritt. What is the meaning of this? Patricia's voice was clipped, authoritative. Mrs. Hartwell, I'm Sarah Chen, representing Ms. Keen in a matter concerning Emma's well-being. Sarah handed over official documents. We're here to conduct a court-ordered welfare assessment. This is outrageous. Emma is perfectly fine. Then you won't mind us verifying that. Sarah's tone brooked no argument. Where is Emma now? Patricia's composure cracked slightly. She's in her room. She's been having some adjustment issues lately, but that's perfectly normal for a child her age. We'd like to see her, please. The house was a showcase of wealth. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, expensive artwork. But it felt more like a museum than a home. As they climbed the staircase, Merritt noticed the absence of any photographs or mementos from Emma's life before the Hartwells. It was as if the first 4 years of the little girl's existence had been erased. Patricia knocked on a door at the end of the hallway. Emma, sweetheart, there are some people here to see you. I don't want to see anyone, came a small voice from inside. Merritt's heart clenched at the flatness in Emma's tone, so different from the bright, curious child she remembered. Emma, it's important, Patricia insisted, opening the door. The little girl sitting on the enormous canopy bed looked nothing like the Emma who had once planted flowers in their tiny garden. She was thinner, paler, her dark hair hanging limply around a face that seemed too serious for a 5-year-old. When she looked up and saw Merritt, her entire world shifted. Mama Merritt? The whisper was barely audible, full of disbelief and desperate hope. Merritt sank to her knees, opening her arms as Emma launched herself across the room. The little girl hit her with the force of a cannonball, clinging so tightly that Merritt could barely breathe. You came back, Emma sobbed against her shoulder. They said you didn't want me anymore, but you came back. I never stopped wanting you, baby girl, Merritt whispered, her own tears flowing freely. I never stopped loving you, not for 1 second. That's enough, Patricia snapped, moving toward them. Emma, come away from her this instant. No, Emma's grip on Merritt tightened. I want to stay with Mama Merritt. She's not your mother, Patricia said harshly. How many times do we have to go through this? Your mother is dead, and this woman is no one to you. She is someone to me. Emma's voice rose to a wail. She's my Mama Merritt, and I love her, and I want to go home. This is your home. It's not my home. I want my real home with Mama Merritt, and I want my flower garden, and I want my old room, and I want—" Emma's words dissolved into heartbroken sobs. Cassian stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Mrs. Hartwell, perhaps we could discuss this somewhere else? This is clearly distressing for Emma." "You have no right to be here," Patricia snarled, her careful facade completely gone now. "Any of you. Emma is my granddaughter, and I won't have her confused by people who abandoned her." "We didn't abandon her," Merritt said fiercely, standing with Emma still in her arms. "You took her from me. You used your money and your lawyers to steal a child from the only stable home she'd known since her mother died. I gave her opportunities you never could have provided. You gave her trauma." Merritt's voice cracked. "Look at her, Patricia. Really look at her. Does this look like a happy, thriving child to you?" For the first time, Patricia seemed to actually see Emma's condition. The weight loss, the dark circles under her eyes, the way she clung to Merritt like a lifeline. "She's been having some difficulties adjusting," Patricia admitted reluctantly. "But with time—" "It's been over a year," Sarah Chen interjected, making notes on her tablet. "How much more time does she need to adjust to a supposedly loving home?" "Emma," Cassian said gently, approaching the little girl with the same patience he used with his own sons. "Do you remember me? I'm Cassian, and these are my boys, August and Leo." Emma lifted her head from Merritt's shoulder, studying the twins with curiosity. "Are they your babies, Mama Merritt?" "They're very special to me," Merritt said carefully. "Just like you are. Can I play with them?" "Of course you can, sweetheart." As Emma slowly warmed up to August and Leo, showing them her room while chattering about her toys, Sarah continued documenting everything: the sterile environment, Patricia's hostility, Emma's obvious attachment to Merritt, and comfort with her presence. "Mrs. Hartwell," Sarah said finally, "I'm recommending that Emma be placed in temporary custody with Ms. Keene pending a full psychological evaluation." "Absolutely not. I won't allow it. It's not your decision anymore," Sarah replied calmly. "The court will review our findings and determine what's in Emma's best interest." "You can't do this." Patricia's voice was shaking now. "We've given her everything: private school, music lessons, a trust fund. Everything except what she actually needed," Merritt said quietly. "Love, stability, and connection to her past." Patricia's face crumpled, and for a moment, she looked like what she was: a grieving grandmother who had lost her son and was terrified of losing her granddaughter too. "I just wanted to give her the best life possible," she whispered. "So did I," Merritt said gently. "But the best life for Emma isn't about money or opportunities. It's about being with people who love her for who she is, not who they want her to become." 2 hours later, they walked out of the Hartwell house with Emma's hand firmly clasped in Merritt's. The little girl had packed a small bag with her most treasured possessions: a stuffed elephant that had been her mother's, a photo of Claire, and a pressed flower from the garden she'd shared with Merritt. "Are we really going home?" Emma asked as they settled into Cassian's rental car. "We're going to our new home," Merritt said, buckling Emma's seatbelt. "All of us together. Forever?" Merritt looked at Cassian, who was watching them in the rearview mirror with an expression of complete devotion. "Forever," she confirmed. As they drove through the night toward their flight back to New York, Emma fell asleep between August and Leo, all 3 children tangled together like they'd been siblings their whole lives. Cassian reached over and took Merritt's hand, intertwining their fingers. "No regrets?" he asked quietly. "Only that it took us so long to fight for what we wanted." "What do we want?" he asked, though they both knew the answer. "Everything," Merritt said simply. "A family, a future, each other." Cassian brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Then that's what we'll have." As the lights of Vancouver disappeared behind them, Merritt felt something she hadn't experienced in over a year: complete peace. They had fought Patricia Hartwell and won. They had brought Emma home, and somehow in the process they had found their way to each other. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be legal battles, adjustment periods, and the complex work of blending their wounded hearts into something whole and beautiful. But for the first time since Claire's death, Merritt could envision a future that included joy, laughter, and the kind of love that survives any challenge. She was finally home. 6 months later, the sound of children's laughter drifted through the open French doors of the Wolf estate, where a small garden party was in full swing. Emma, now 6, was teaching August and Leo how to plant marigolds in the expanded flower beds that had become her pride and joy. Her dark hair caught the late afternoon sunlight as she patiently showed Leo, now almost 3, how to pat soil around the tiny seedlings. Gently, she instructed with the serious authority of an older sister. Flowers need to feel safe to grow properly. Cassian watched from the kitchen doorway, a smile tugging at his lips as he observed his children. All 3 of them now, officially and legally, working together in the garden that had become the heart of their home. "She's a natural teacher," Merritt said, appearing beside him with 2 cups of coffee. She wore a simple sundress, her auburn hair loose around her shoulders, and the stress lines that had marked her face for so long had finally begun to fade. "Wonder where she gets that from," Cassian murmured, accepting the coffee and wrapping his free arm around her waist. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings, family counseling sessions, and the delicate work of helping Emma transition into their lives, while maintaining her connection to her mother's memory. They'd converted the guest room into Emma's sanctuary, decorated with photos of Claire and filled with the books and toys that reminded her of their life together in Oregon. The custody battle had been brutal, but brief. Sarah Chen had been ruthless in documenting the damage Patricia Hartwell's approach had caused, and when the judge saw Emma's dramatic improvement after just 2 weeks with Merritt, the decision became inevitable. Emma would stay with the woman she'd always called Mama Merritt, while the Hartwells were granted supervised visitation twice a month, a compromise that was slowly healing the wounds between the families. "Daddy! Mama Merritt!" August called out, dirt smudged across his cheek. "Come see what we planted." The title had come naturally to all 3 children, and Merritt had stopped correcting it weeks ago. She was their Mama Merritt, not trying to replace Haley's memory, but creating something new and equally precious. As they walked toward the garden, Cassian marveled at how completely their lives had transformed. The house that had once echoed with loneliness now rang with constant activity. Breakfast was chaos, bedtime required military precision, and there wasn't a single room that didn't bear evidence of being truly lived in. "Look," Emma pointed proudly to a neat row of newly planted flowers. "These are for Mama Claire, so she knows we didn't forget her. And these," she indicated another section, "are for Mama Haley, so she knows she's part of our family too." Cassian felt his throat tighten. Emma's capacity for inclusion, for making space for everyone she loved, never failed to amaze him. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," Merritt said, kneeling down to admire the little girl's work. "I think both mamas would love their special flowers. Do you think they can see them? From heaven?" Leo asked, his small face serious. "I think they can see everything," Merritt said gently, "and I think they're very proud of how caring and strong their children have become." As evening fell and they gathered for dinner on the back terrace, Cassian found himself studying the scene with wonder. Emma was cutting August's chicken into smaller pieces while chattering about her upcoming school play. Leo was methodically eating around his vegetables, a habit that drove Merritt crazy, but that she tolerated with patient humor. The conversation flowed between mundane concerns: Emma's math homework, August's upcoming doctor's appointment, Leo's request for a pet hamster, and the deeper issues they were still navigating as a blended family. "Mrs. Patterson said I could invite my whole family to the play," Emma announced. "That means you and Daddy and August and Leo, but also Grammy and Grandpa Hartwell if they want to come." The relationship with Patricia and Robert Hartwell was still fragile, but it was improving. The older couple had been devastated to realize how their actions had affected Emma, and they were slowly learning to appreciate that loving their granddaughter meant supporting the family she'd chosen. "I'm sure they'd love to come," Merritt said. "You know how proud they are of you." After dinner, as they went through the elaborate bedtime routine that ensured all 3 children felt equally loved and secure, Cassian reflected on how natural this had all become. 6 months ago, he'd been a man drowning in his own inadequacies as a single father. Now, he was part of a parenting team that somehow made even the most challenging moments feel manageable. "Emma's asking about adoption again," Merritt said later, as they sat on their bedroom balcony sharing a glass of wine and watching the stars emerge. "What did you tell her?" "The same thing we've told her before, that she's already part of our family in every way that matters, but if she wants to make it official, we're open to discussing it." "And the boys?" August asked if that means Emma would be his real sister instead of his heart sister. "I told him she'd always be both." Cassian smiled at his eldest son's terminology. August had struggled initially with understanding how Emma could be his sister when she hadn't always lived with them, but he'd eventually developed his own categories for the different types of family bonds. "Have I mentioned lately that I love you?" Cassian asked, reaching for Merritt's hand. Only every day. She leaned against his shoulder, content and peaceful. Sometimes I can't believe this is our life now. What do you mean? A year ago I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. I was convinced I'd never have a family again. Never trust anyone enough to build something real. She paused, watching a shooting star streak across the sky. And now look at us. Do you ever miss it? The simplicity of before? Merritt laughed, a sound full of genuine joy. You mean the simplicity of grief and isolation and believing I didn't deserve happiness? No, I definitely don't miss that. Even with all the chaos, the sleepless nights when Leo has nightmares, the meltdowns when August doesn't want to share his toys, the teen attitude Emma's already starting to develop, especially because of all that, Merritt said firmly. The chaos means we're alive, we're connected, we're real. I'll take beautiful chaos over empty perfection any day. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds and the faint murmur of the baby monitor that let them know all three children were finally settled. Merritt, Cassian said finally, his voice carrying a weight that made her look at him closely. Yes, marry me. It wasn't the first time he'd brought it up, but something in his tone tonight was different, more certain, more urgent. We've talked about this, she said gently. The children need stability right now, and we're still figuring out our family dynamics. The children need to see that love can be permanent, Cassian interrupted. They need to know that when adults make promises to each other and to them, those promises mean something. Merritt studied his face in the starlight, seeing the man who had fought Patricia Hartwell's lawyers and won, who had reorganized his entire life around three children's needs, who had loved her through her darkest fears and most stubborn defenses. Is that a yes? He asked when she didn't immediately respond. That's a let me think about it, she said, but she was smiling. How long do you need to think? Maybe until tomorrow morning. I can live with that. But when they woke up the next day to Emma crawling into their bed demanding pancakes, followed immediately by August and Leo, who had apparently decided that Saturday mornings were for family pile-ups, Merritt realized she didn't need to think at all. This was her family. This was her home. This was the life she'd never dared to dream was possible. Yes, she said quietly, as Cassian tried to untangle himself from three sets of small arms. Yes, what? Emma asked curiously. Yes, I'll marry your daddy, Merritt said, laughing as all three children erupted in cheers and began planning a wedding that would apparently require a flower girl, 2 ring-bearers, and a very large cake. As chaos ensued and their carefully planned quiet morning dissolved into excited chatter about dresses and flowers, and whether they could get married in the garden where Emma's special flowers grew, Cassian caught Merritt's eye across the tangle of children and mouthed the words, I love you. She mouthed them back, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, and there would be many, they would face them together, not as a man trying to heal from devastating loss and a woman running from a painful past, but as partners building something beautiful from the pieces of their broken hearts. Sometimes the most extraordinary families were the ones that chose each other, fought for each other, and refused to give up on love even when the world seemed determined to tear them apart. Sometimes the greatest victories came, not from having everything go according to plan, but from having the courage to write a completely new plan when the old one fell apart. And sometimes, if you were very lucky and very brave, you got the chance to discover that the family you'd always been meant to have was worth every battle you'd had to fight to find them. What would you have done in Cassian's position? Fought for love despite the risks, or chosen the safety of keeping your heart protected? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.